Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pop Culture SquadCast. We are live once again, second time this week. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing swell. It's a happy Thursday,
It
although a
is
very wet one where we
it
are.
is a very wet one on the East Coast. Absolutely. Tomorrow it looks to be even wetter and messier. I'm hoping that we get through the day and then the evening clears up because I have something to do tomorrow
But
night.
I think it's good to give our viewers a heads up. Those who are watching us live, even though I don't feel live, because these storms could knock one or both or all of us out at any
Sure,
given.
absolutely. So yeah, we are gonna hello. We are live. And so there are storms in the area right now. It's pretty calm here. I don't know what it's like up there, but it's been messy all day here. Uh, we've had
Yeah, messy.
power issues in our bunkers. So
Mm.
um, I want to start off tonight with something that I know that you get excited about.
Uh-oh,
And
barbecue.
we do have a guest coming later. Marc Guggenheim is going to be in the house in a little bit. I expect him to be here around 8:30, hopefully sooner, but if he's here then, that's great. Hi, Silas. But I wanted to talk about, you are a huge supporter of labor and unions, and there is there's some news coming in the entertainment industry related to unions, and I'm not sure if you saw this info. There is
Yes.
animate the Animation Guild has a Saturday rally set um, on Saturday, August 12th or 10th. I'm sorry, August 10th in Burbank. So if you are in LA and you're watching this, you know, think about going out there and supporting. We are now in a situation where we're a year removed from the TV and movie writer strike. Animation kind of kept things moving a little bit while that strike was going on in terms of Hollywood, but now they're up for negotiations with the same organization, the AMTP. Um, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, this sounds like I'm putting somebody down, and I'm not. But all of the previous strikes and all of the previous labor negotiations that have been successful for anybody, the results of that kind of roll over. So people from the animation union are going to say, well, you gave these guys this.
Sure.
Our version of this is that. You should give that to us too. And then management will say, something a very polite version of no the fuck we won't, and things
And
go
we will
on.
be back in these same situations.
Well, maybe not. I mean let's hope for the best, and I'm very much in favor of collective bargaining. All the old Republicans I know, or most of them, were too. It's one of the things that really makes America unique back when that was a thing, and it's more of a thing now than it has been in decades. So I wish everybody well. I'm always proud when anybody stands up to defend themselves. And when they get together as a group and say, this is what we need, this is what you're getting, let's see if we can get some equity going here, that's always a good thing.
So I agree. I hope that goes well. I have another piece of news that came out over the last couple of days because this is the weirdest part. The weirdest part of these Thursday shows, which are great and I love them, and we're going to keep doing them as we can. But we typically get a week's worth of, or almost a week's worth of news, so we can in our opening block where we can talk about that. We got 2 days to fill up stuff. So what we didn't get there in Tuesday night, we got to bring Thursday night and whatever has happened. One of the things that happened, a long way of getting there, is that there was an announcement that we're going to switch this. We're going to share this tab. And so the announcement is that Will Eisner's John Law is going to get re-released from Titan Comics under their hard case crime label next year. Um, and I wanted your thoughts on A, this story, and B, the concept of being able to get this back. I'm hoping that, everyone will get compensated properly. Obviously, I'm sure they are, but the solicit is that it's going to be 152 pages, $24.99 on sale in March.
That sounds expensive, but then again, so does a package of Twinkies to me. So
It's hardcover.
That's nice. Okay, I'm a huge Will Eisner fan.
I know that.
I am a huge fan of Gary Challoner's as well. This may surprise some folks because he's this Australian dude and hasn't done a lot of work in the States because he's this Australian dude. He's always very gifted and very talented. I've seen his John Law story. He's very proud of it. He has been for decades, and he should be. So I welcome this effort enormously, for Gary's sake and for history's sake, because everything Will Eisner ever did or should be in print.
And this
everything anybody has done should be in print, but more so Will.
Right. And this has been out of print for a while. I think the last thing that was printed in this was in 2004, if I'm correct.
It sounds right.
Yes, IDW reprinted it in 2004. And it's an interesting story because, like, John Law is a Will Eisner character, and it's not the spirit. And the article that I'm reading here has mentioned that it was something that Kat Ironwood had uncovered and got when she was working with Will on on the spirit and everything like that, and brought it back to prominence.
Yep.
And
I think the story was actually plowed over as a spirit story, if my recollection is accurate.
Correct.
And that was pretty seamless. But it's a good story. It is not the best thing that anybody has ever done. It's
of course
up there. It's top shelf. I don't mean that in the IDW sense. It's not top shelf. It is the shelf below. And if you're a fan of comics, if you're interested in how it works, or just willing to read great shit, that's a good place to go. Plus, Gary took on a hell of a challenge by doing this, and he met the challenge.
I think that's important. I want to highlight a couple of comics that are coming out, that came out this week, because it's already Thursday. Yesterday was New Comic Book Day. So there's a couple of new number ones that I want to talk about that I found are important to mention. Some of them, some of them, if you don't know, then I want to highlight them for you too. So I read this issue 1 of this book called Powers Fantasy. It is. Have you read it?
No, I haven't read it yet. It's on my stack. It's a weird logo.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the design. I am, however, a huge fan of the two creators. It is truly a Kieran Gillen story where there's an interesting thing for me that Kieran, he hits this very interesting dynamic where it is highbrow in that the story that he creates makes you think beyond the actions that are happening on the page, right? But he doesn't take you off the page. Like there's a series of things that are happening in the story that you need to pay attention to, but at the same time, the back of your mind, they're like these longer more deeper thoughts that he's evoking. And the other part is that the artist,
that sounds like a good thing to me.
it
Yeah.
is.
I realize
I
you
find
don't always
that.
get it off, but
I'm sorry.
I realize that you're taking a risk, the creator, and you don't always pull that off. But when you do, it's great.
He does a good job of doing that a lot. I think he's good at that. This isn't a perfect issue. I'll tell you. I'll be clear on that, but I think it's definitely worth a read. And it's a setup, but there's something happening in this issue, so that's also beneficial. I always love it when you read a first issue and it's not just an introduction. It is an introduction, but is more than that, right? And the artist Casper Wingard, I'm a huge fan. I have been a huge fan of his. He's done a bunch of stuff by now. I first discovered him on the Peter Cannon book, the most recent Peter Cannon book.
Yeah.
And he also did home spirited houses. I forget the name of it, but with Dan Waters. That was a good book. And there's something very interesting about the way he sets characters off on the page that's just captivating and intriguing. So I really like this. So this is definitely one that I recommend. Next book on the list. This is a collection, and I know you like it. So this, if you have missed Traveling to Mars, it is now collected in one volume. And this is really for our listeners and people out there. I know you've read the entire thing, and I know you're fans. Why don't you give our listeners kind of an idea if they're not familiar with this Eisner winning Best New Series?
Yeah, and for good reason. It's damn good.
Or Eisner nominated, I'm sorry.
It's one of the best things that Marc has written, and that alone is stunningly high praise because I really like his stuff. And this story hits me on a somewhat more personal level in that the lead character is a person I identify with. He's, old hippie who never really was able to make all the connections in life he wanted to, although he wasn't a loser, although he felt like a loser. And he's got this terminal disease, and this big corporation wants to land on Mars before anybody else does so they can claim the rights to all the minerals. So they can send him there to plant the corporate flag, which alone is funny, on Mars so they can own all the resources. And, he's dying. He feels like he has no life on Earth, and he didn't have a life on Earth. So what the hell? And he kind of goes Mystery Science Theater on us. He's got like 2 robots that he talks to and stuff. And it's really interesting. And the beautiful thing is he lands on Mars before the end of the story. We see him and his robots and how they relate to their new surroundings and their new purpose in life. Because being on Mars gives him a purpose in life. So I enjoyed it. And on a superficial level, it's just a fun story, but it's going to tug at your brain a little bit here and there.
That's what we love.
That's always good. Yeah.
This is 11 issues collected in one volume. It was
I like the
11 issues. It's odd. Let's see. I believe there's one more. Have you read this?
Haven't read it yet.
Haven't read it yet. Neither have I. So
I'm looking forward to it because of the writer.
You're going to. So this is Uncanny X-Men returning. I'm hoping that we're gonna get into a little bit of X-Men conversation with our guest tonight. He is a former writer of X-Men, and This is a big deal, especially with where people's minds are in terms of the from the ashes, the new beginning stuff going on. Um, Gail Simone, David Marquez, Matt Wilson colors. Um, I'm excited to see this. I'm interested to see how long Gail will stay. I We haven't had a long run from Gail in quite some time, and I don't know that that's in her. I don't know what her plans are at all.
No, but she has done that,
Oh,
and
she has done long runs.
and
Yeah,
and I can see her wanting to spend some time doing
I hope so.
specific projects with beginnings, middles, and ends. X-Men, I don't think that any of the previous long-term writers are going to shiver in their boots because these days it makes no sense. Writers and artists just change as frequently as one changes one's underwear. But Gail is one of the best. And also, it allows us the opportunity for a Wolverine Bart Simpson crossover, which I can hardly wait for.
Well, I don't know that they're going to get the licensing on that, but not that they couldn't afford it. Just I don't know.
Disney has it. It's Disney property.
Right,
The Simpsons.
I forgot Lisa Simpson is a Disney princess.
Yeah, yes, she is. And Steve Ditko is a Disney legend.
That's hilarious.
my guess is, because I haven't opened the book, that there's a page early up on that one. There certainly is in Doctor Strange, which I did read, that commemorates. We seem to have a huge traffic accident just outside my window, so if you're hearing horns and stuff,
no, we're good.
Okay, it's distracting me at least.
I'm sorry,
but all right, Steve deserves all the praise that he can get. Whether he wanted it or not, or whether he likes it, would have liked it or not, he is a legend. And you don't get to say whether you are or are not a legend. And I don't think that Steve would say one thing or the other about it. So he's very, very well positioned now because Marvel has control of so much stuff of his that they didn't have control of previously. Disney deserves, we deserve to have Disney thank Steve. Does that make sense?
Oh, that's fair. It's still been so, I don't know if you saw recently, but Ike Perlmutter has sold his or has no more ties. Like I think he had sold his last stock or something or other, last shares. He's now completely gone from the Marvel thing, and it's just such an interesting concept of where we were 15 years ago or so, 17, and the state that Marvel was in, financially, to now just being part of one of the largest media giants ever imagined, or not unimagined.
It is difficult for those of us who are Howard the Duck fans. Because Howard used to look really cool, and then Disney's legal department, which has a reputation of being Dr. Doom, started to harass Marvel, and they had to change him. So Howard looks totally different, and it doesn't work for me.
I did not know that. I did not know that. That is because of Donald?
Because of Donald. And he doesn't look like Donald. I mean, he didn't
never
look
like
Donald. And Donald didn't smoke cigars that didn't explode. So what the fuck, guys? Come on. Well, I'd like to see them undo that. That's not going to happen.
Right. what I don't have a whole lot of new. There are plenty of new number ones. Please go to popculturesquad.com. New number ones are out there. There's a bunch more stuff that we talked about that came out this week that you should check out. But the other book that I wanted to highlight on the show is something that we had that we've talked about before, and it's The Pedestrian. And I had Sean and Joey on a separate podcast or Pop Culture Squad that you can find on our YouTube page. This is a book that has been brewing for years, since the beginning of COVID, and it is finally out and available for people to check out. I've read it. I've read this issue. I've read the second issue. Secret. But it's something you should check out. It is of its time, but also timeless. Like it is for people who are here today. People who are living in this world and experiencing things will appreciate this. It's about being good. It's about helping a neighbor. And it's really cool. I definitely recommend it. It was one of the things that the guys said when they were. I know I've seen bits and pieces of this for a very long time before it even got greenlit at Magma Comics, and they tried several places to try and find it a home, and they kind of said, well, I guess he said maybe the place where this comic belongs doesn't exist yet. And it was turned out to be true because Magma Comics did not exist. Now it does, and it has a home there. So
it sounds to me like what the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles went through.
Yeah, there's that.
They sent that first issue out to every publisher in probably in the world, and every single person who they sent it to said, interesting, no thank you, including me,
including you. So when you got it, right?
I got it at First Comics. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What did you remember it?
Do I remember what?
Do you remember getting the book and having having thoughts on it? I
mean, within a year, I had to rethink my decision as to whether that was a good idea or a bad idea. It was a good idea in that it didn't fit into our publishing plan at that time at First Comic. In a great many ways, it didn't fit into that publishing plan. But it's one of the most successful properties in the comics field ever. And these guys did it on their own, joining Dave Sim and Wendy Pini and so many great people. So I respect the hell out of them, and I respect the hell out of anybody who will take on that journey, because it's an amazing way to go insane.
Listen, these guys worked really hard to get this out there, and I'm happy for them. I think it's a good story. I think the book is good. There's this really hard ass cop, sergeant or something like that in there that's incredibly good looking. I'm just gonna say he looks he's got this nice bald head and glasses and a goatee, and
really,
I don't know, he looks pretty much exactly like me. And go if you anybody's watching, please, I recommend if you go to popculturesquad.com or if you go to our Pop Culture Squad YouTube page, there's a link to the video. You'll find it there where I interviewed these guys. So Sean, the artist, is a friend of mine. He's been a friend for a long time, and he went ahead and kind of drew me as one of the characters on a side thing, and I hadn't met Joey until Sean's wedding a few months ago, and we met and we talked out, and it was he didn't realize until the day that we were interviewing that I was that guy, and he realized that guy's a bit of an asshole, and he's like, he felt really bad. He's like, I didn't know you when I like, when I was writing it. So again, The Pedestrian is out from Magma Comics this week. There's a bunch of good stuff out there. We are going to have a guest. Should be here shortly.
May I plug a book that was released this week?
Yes.
I only read a few of this week's books because I realized I had to finish off the rereading for the 300th time a Nero Wolfe story.
Well, I'm sure.
And that's very preemptive for me. But one of my favorite books for the past year has been Birds of Prey.
Yes.
And this week's issue is batshit. And I mean that in every positive sense of the term. The way that Harlan Ellison said he meant the word batshit in that lawsuit. It's wonderful. It's incomprehensible. And once again, Big Barda steals the show along with a bunch of bunny rabbits.
Well, I can see that. So it is, it's issue 12. So there's one more, I think, and in this arc. Let's see if we can get the cover up here.
I believe you're right. I believe this is like part 4 of 5 or something like that.
Yeah, there's one more issue in this arc. Here's the cover if you're looking for it. And
yeah,
this is cover 1. So Kelly Thompson is writing a fantastic Birds of Prey story. It is one of the most exciting things. There's, the two things that I'm most excited that are keeping the writer continuity in the all-in DC all-in realm is Birds of Prey and Wonder Woman. And Kelly Thompson's Birds of Prey is excellent. Kelly Thompson's taking on some other things in all in, and I try to read everything she writes.
Yeah,
I haven't read this issue, but I've seen pages from it. I've also I happened to I ran into Gavin Guidry, who's writing the Gotham sequences. This is an interesting like multiverse hopping story that's going on. It's done extremely well. And the framing sequence in each issue is drawn by Gavin Guidry, and I've seen his pages when I happened to see him a couple of weeks ago, and they just keep getting better. He has gotten better on as this even arc goes on, because I looked through it and I saw the earlier issues coming to, and I saw he was finishing up issue 13 when I saw him. And the characterization again, Barda has been phenomenal. Her relationship with Cassandra Cain is top notch.
it really is.
Yeah, the development of Sin and her new reality has been something I didn't expect to enjoy as much as I do. I highly recommend it. I agree with you on that.
Wow, we actually agree.
Sometimes, a lot of times we do.
Almost always, actually.
What?
Almost always.
Well, yeah, that's true. There are moments, but I want to kind of highlight while we're waiting here, and we do have a guest coming soon. He should be here momentarily. He's on the LA time, so there's that whole thing. I saw something recently about the concept of new East Coast versus West Coast time, and it has to do with the subways. New York subways run on time for the most part, right? For the most part. If they don't, you get upset.
Well, it's New York. How can you tell? Everybody's upset anyway.
Well, my point is, people on the West Coast tend to not be as time sensitive as people on the East Coast and New Yorkers, because their public transit is not timed. There's, you could, the slightest thing could just turn into a mass thing. And this is something that we should definitely talk to our guest about, because he is a New Yorker who was transplanted into Los Angeles and the whole East Coast versus West Coast time. He's in our green room, so I'm gonna bring him in because I don't want to keep him waiting. We are now here, so I want to bring him in. I want to let everybody know that we have Emmy Award winning Marc Guggenheim, friend of ours, and I want to bring him in right now. So everybody, welcome Marc Guggenheim. Hi, Marc. How are you?
Hey, good. How you doing? Wow, those were some deep cuts there.
Yeah. Can you raise your volume just a little bit? Your mic, is that possible? I can grab it if you can.
Sure, maybe. How do I do that? How does one do that?
There's a settings set, and you can adjust your mic volume on your. Go to audio.
Settings and then audio.
Volume. How's that?
That's better. That's better.
Better?
Great.
Okay.
Yes, deep cuts. I especially like the first one.
The Marvel Comics Presents?
The Marvel Comics Presents. You were colorist, an 8-page story on Iceman and Human Torch.
Yeah, I was an intern.
I'm sure. I figured that.
I managed to worm my way into a coloring gig, which looking back on, I was like, wow, that's so weird. But yeah, it's kind of cool. It's a fun bit of business. And that was my first comic book credit, which, as I recall, they misspelled my name in the master.
Did they?
Yes.
That's how you know you've made it.
That is exactly how I knew I made it. It's kind of amazing. I really, it's so. This was in the days before computer coloring, when, I wouldn't say anyone could color, but most anyone could color.
Sure.
Yeah.
I want to. Before we get into stuff, we have a lot to get into. Dean's watching, so hey, Dean. But this is the mesh thing he just mentioned. That you I saw this picture on Dean's page. You were out to dinner with Dean and George Costanza and Chris Gage, and I was floored by this conversation, by the fact that you guys had dinner, and I'll tell you why. And I do you know why? I thought it was just weird.
No.
Do you know what Christos Gage's most recent work is?
I want to say it's Weapon X-Men, but is there something?
No, he has an independent book that he did with Vault called Unnatural Order.
Oh, I didn't know about this.
And in that book, there's this sorcerer who goes to CERN and changes reality.
Ooh. So you're telling me I have to sue Chris?
Well, I'm saying I don't. It's weird that didn't come up.
It is weird that didn't come up.
It's weird that you guys were having dinner like at this time. Like I feel like it belongs in the book or one of the books.
Yeah. Oh, now I definitely have to hunt this down.
You never know what's going to show up in print after these dinners.
Right. So
you got to be careful about inadvertent comments, because that may give somebody what they think of as a great idea.
It's funny. I was having dinner with Mark Paniccia, who is my friend, but also my Star Wars editor, and Ethan Sachs, who is a Star Wars writer. And Mark texted me this tweet that was a total joke. But honestly, I think it might be the basis for my next novel. Because it really had me thinking, and it's I saved the tweet because if we do end up turning that into a book, it all comes back to that one dinner and that one tweet.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I think that half of the great stories that come from creators who've been to big conventions with all these great dinners come out of those dinners.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like I'm immediately thinking of the Wolverine miniseries that Chris Claremont and Frank Miller did. That came out of, I think they were in the car back from San Diego Comic-Con, driving together, and they hatched that whole book, which was obviously turned into a very seminal, very landmark, iconic comic. So yeah, I do think whenever you get enough creatives together, some cool frisson happens, and you end up with some ideas that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
Yeah. Also, you're sitting around relaxed with friends or people who've just become your friends. So you can bounce off ideas that way because nobody's covering their nuts.
Right. Sure. Absolutely.
We're just having this swell time. Sometimes those projects don't happen. And for, oh my God, 20 years now, I've been carrying this anger inside me because at some convention, I don't even remember what we were in, George Perez and I worked out a whole Julius Caesar adaptation.
Oh, wow.
And my God, that would have been terrific to see.
That would have been amazing. I'm a big believer in anything that George set his mind to. He's one of my all-time favorites. So anything that he was going to do was going to be incredible.
Yeah, but just imagine that one.
Yeah.
I mean, he can out Roman army Russ Heath's classic, 1001 soldiers ad.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here, Mark. I'm going to explain a little bit, and we're going to talk about this. I want to start off talking about In Any Lifetime, which is your new novel that was released last week. I am 40% through.
Well,
and I absolutely love it.
Oh, thank you.
But if you want to understand the CERN reference, go read the book because I don't want to spoil unless whatever you want to spoil, but that's where that comes from. So what do you want to say about this book? And where it came from?
Well, it's funny. It's an idea I've actually been working on off and on for the past 10 plus years. So I'll be honest, I don't even fully remember where I got the initial idea. The idea is actually pretty straightforward. It's a story about a quantum physicist whose wife dies in a tragic accident, and he's looking for the one parallel universe in all of the multiverse where she's still alive. So it's a bit of a romance. It's a bit of an adventure. There's got some thriller elements to it. I sort of describe it as what if Christopher Nolan wrote and directed The Notebook.
I'm sorry, you dropped the last word.
What if Christopher Nolan wrote and directed The Notebook?
The Notebook. Oh, yes. I get that. I will tell you, there is a tenderness and a breathlessness to the relationship between the main character and his wife that brings me to tears as I read through it. It is the love story that I did not expect to find, and I cannot express how amazingly you convey that emotion.
Oh, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Well, as I say in the acknowledgments, the 20-year marriage to my wife was the research that I did for that. So a lot of research went into it.
So that means you can now take your wedding off your taxes.
Sure. Yeah.
You can go retroactively do it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
An amendment.
Who did the cover to your book? You know.
I wish I knew. I don't know the name of the actual graphic artist. I can tell you that it was not our original cover. The original cover was actually very different, and it was fine. There was nothing wrong with the cover. When I saw it, I was like, "Oh, this is cool." But my editor, Chantel Osman, she was not happy with it. She's like, this is good, but this can be better. And she went back and she worked with the graphic design department at Lake Union and really reconceived of the entire novel from the ground up, down to the color scheme and the hourglass / infinity symbol,
Sure.
the whole thing. I love the cover so much, to the point where I can't believe we ever considered something else. But it's terrific, and it really is a testament to Chantel's passion and eye and expertise.
And she really did her job, and my hats off to her, because that's not always an easy thing to do, which she had done. And of course, I have to apologize for saying, "Wow, your novel came out, and who did the cover?"
I'm very happy in this case to let people judge a book by its cover. They're more than welcome to do that. I think the cover is phenomenal, and it conveys a lot of, I think, cool big ideas in one very clean, compelling image. They did an amazing job.
It's great. It is. It's beautiful.
I want to I want to kind of give you a little bit of time to talk about the process here, because this is really your first prose original novel. Like, you've done novels that are kind of based on other properties, but this is your story, your original story. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, I did an original novel back in 2017, but truth be told, I like to consider this more my first novel, because that novel, while I think the idea was really strong and very resonant, I don't think my skills as a writer were up to the execution that the idea required.
Okay, well, we'll grant you this is first novel. Okay, so how
It's
your
the
acknowledgement page, because
Yeah,
I've read your acknowledgement page that you posted on your Substack, which I'm going to put the Substack link in the quote in the comments so people can go follow that, because it's a really good read. But you referenced quite an assortment of collaborators, and I would think that my thought process on writing a prose novel would be kind of solitary, but you reference so many people being part of this process. How did that work for you?
well, it's interesting. Like I said, I've been playing around with this idea for over 10 years. My initial notes, I think, are dated March of 2013. And because I work in a variety of different mediums, I had a variety of different mediums available to me to tell the story. And I played around with doing it as a movie. I played around with doing it as a graphic novel. And, I discussed the story with a great number of people as I was working on it. It wasn't actually until the pandemic and lockdown happened that I actually had the time to consider telling the story in really the way it always wanted to be told, which is as a prose novel. But writing a novel obviously takes a huge amount of time, and that's time I did not have until the lockdown. I was busy running multiple shows, and writing comic books on the side. For much of that 10-year period. And as a result, I never even contemplated doing it as a novel until I actually had the time to undertake that endeavor. COVID ruins a lot of things, but it did have a slight upside for me.
It changed everything in
Yes.
many things in subtle ways. And I think we're now beginning just to have healed to the point where we can actually talk about the good stuff that probably wouldn't have happened without the lockdown.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, there were a lot of, positives, at least in the early going. I would say the first 6 months were absolutely wonderful. 2019 was a very busy year for me. I was working on multiple projects, multiple shows. I, was really dividing my time between Prague and Vancouver, where I had two different productions going. And I was, by the time 2020 came around, I was completely exhausted. I was totally missing my family. And I really was desperate to reconnect, not just with my wife and daughters, but with my process as a writer. Sort of one of the great ironies of working in television is you get into television in order to be a writer. But the more experience you get and the higher up the chain of command you're promoted, the less time you have to actually write. So for me, the lockdown was really beneficial in the sense that I was able to just write. I was just doing pure writing, and some of that was obviously on the novel, and some of it was on some creator-owned comics, and some of it was on some feature gigs that I had booked. I really embraced the whole idea of having a chance to go about my day just writing and not being pulled away for budget meetings or notes calls or have to go into editing or you name it, all different things that pull at you when you're running a show or multiple shows. So it was really great. Again, at the outset, I think after 6 months, the bloom falls off of any rose and you go, man, I want to go for life to go back to normal. And in many ways it hasn't.
No.
In many ways, we're still dealing with the consequences of COVID, and I don't think we are going to go back to those pre-COVID days. I think some things are irrevocably changed.
We evolve. Earthlings evolve. And I think we tend to evolve faster than we think because we're in the process of evolving. So we're there and we're doing it. But having to stop for over 2 years in many ways, and things go away and are replaced eventually with other things. Not yet entirely. Still a lot of empty storefronts out there.
Yeah.
But it didn't. It broke us from the pattern of being part of that change. We get a chance to see that change happen without us, without any of us. That's unique. That's pretty weird.
I told my kids, pay attention. You're living through history.
Sure.
This is, really a historic sea change. And I think, the psychological impact of COVID, I think, has yet to be truly understood or truly felt. I think, especially with that younger generation, you have a whole bunch of kids who, spent a lot of their formative years, in their houses or in their apartments. And it's a real shame. And I like I said, I don't think we've fully tallied up the consequences of
and
that.
And it's not over.
In many ways, it's not over. I mean, I think, COVID is with us forever now.
Sure. You can run the 200 at the Olympics with COVID and get a bronze medal.
Apparently you can.
Apparently.
Really?
Yeah, now COVID is, it's part of the fabric of our lives these days.
As
we have some
Rosanna said, you never know what's going to happen.
Sure.
Not one thing, it's another. And COVID was not one thing. It is everything.
Yeah.
I'm really kind of happy I wasn't in San Diego this year because I'm 70. I'm now 74, and that probably wouldn't have been a great place for me.
I was in San Diego. I know a lot of people who got COVID. It was very rampant this year for sure. I don't think it's I don't think it's the type of thing that everyone can do this, unfortunately. I think this is, like I said, the thing that we're now living with, and we all have to make decisions based upon our ages, our vulnerabilities, comorbidities, etc. We have to be smart about just the reality that we're now living with, that the world has fundamentally changed. There's this new disease now that is not going away.
If you can take one step off of Earth and look back on Earth, particularly if you're an American, these last 5 to 10 years have been one history-making event after another. And we realize that history is probably not as much fun as we had hoped.
I have a theory, and I'm actually, it's funny. I think I'm going to write about this in tomorrow's newsletter. But this idea occurred to me a couple of weeks ago. I have this theory that even if you're the biggest Trump supporter ever, he's your guy. That's totally fine. But even if you are a huge Trump supporter, whether you know it or not, on some subconscious level, his mendacity, his carelessness, his unpredictability, these are things that do great at the national psyche. And it's like having a parent, again, if you're a Trump supporter, it's like having a parent that you love, but who's not a good parent, who
Right.
is doing psychological damage to you on a daily basis. And all of which is a long way of saying, I think for the past 8 years, we've been living under this shadow. And yes, the shadow includes COVID and, economic turbulence and you name it. But things have not been normal for 8 years. We've had this figure looming very largely in our lives that even if you are his biggest fan, he's psychologically breaking you down slowly. I think, assuming, he's not reelected and assuming we're able to move on from him finally after 8 years, I think the country will, breathe a collective sigh of relief and go, wow, yeah, these 8 years really were strange and an outlier. And which is not to say we're going to go back to where things were back in 2015, but because you can never go backwards. But
right.
I think you're gonna. I think people are going to go, wait a second. I was in this abusive relationship essentially, and I didn't even know it.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Relationships.
Yeah, I have to agree with absolutely every word.
I had a conversation actually very similar to that today with a coworker colleague, basically saying, that there is this, and this colleague is definitely way farther right than me, and I'm not anywhere right. But he was saying at the same time, he's not a Trump supporter in any way, but like there's this, you can almost feel the anticipated breath that you're talking about, that really, you can almost feel it in the last couple of weeks. And I'm excited about that. I don't want to turn this show into a political conversation.
Yeah, either. It's more, honestly, to me, it's not about politics. It really is about, it's about all the stuff we're talking about. It's about, our lives and quality of life. And
that's right. It affects our culture enormously.
Enormously. And like I said, in ways that we don't, fully appreciate on a day-to-day basis. But, it really is something that's been on my mind a great deal over the last couple of weeks. And I have to say, I'm very excited about just the possibility of us as a country, being able to move on from this gentleman. And he can
go back to being a joke.
What?
He can go back to being a joke.
Yeah, like, and just honestly, like,
I think he blew that. I don't think we're ever going to take him as a joke.
Mark, you and I are not far from the same age, and it's crazy. I mean, it's crazy. It has been crazy for me. I don't live in New York anymore, and people talk about it. I'm like, I've known who he is my entire life, and why I cannot fathom this getting conned by him. I just can't.
Well, that's fundamentally what it is. Though it's funny, it's like, I think if you look at movies like The Running Man and RoboCop,
that was
We
good.
predicted this. I mean, we
Oh yeah.
genre, geeks essentially. We predicted this.
Well, Frank and Bill predicted it in Elektra.
Yes. Oh my God, completely. Completely. Like, and again, we've seen this movie before.
Right.
And we sort of, I think, willfully ignored all the warning signs. But I just think everyone, no matter what your political affiliation is, everyone's ready to turn the page. These 8 years, I don't think any of us are going to look back on this, fondly and go, oh wow, 2016 through 2024 that was so great. No, there's not a whole lot from these years that we can point to and go, that's really awesome.
I hope and pray you're right. My biggest fear is that now, in whatever this is, August 2024, the problem isn't Trump. The problem is his supporters. The problem is MAGA. And they're going to be around even no matter what happens to Trump.
Yeah.
Hopefully not in this proportion.
Well, and I think, but they still need a standard bearer. They still need someone who is platforming them really. And as Trump has proven, he's sui generis. There's no one else who can be Trump. Trump is unique. He's a unique figure on the political landscape. He's a unique figure on the cultural landscape. Many people like Ron DeSantis have tried to be Trump. Vance tries to be Trump, but they can't be Trump. Trump is unique, for better and for worse.
And so is Dr. June.
Yeah. There's just no turning. There's no replacing him.
I want to come back to the book, just a couple of things, and we have a couple of questions I want to get on the book, and then I want to move on to some other topics, if we can. In reading the book, and this is going to lead into one of our questions, but and I hope you don't take this wrong, but it would be a really good series too.
I consider that a very high compliment.
So there's certain timing aspects where I'm like, episode over, next episode.
Uh-huh.
There's certain just because the way that things lead to, and I really love that aspect of it. The other thing that I noticed was, and I don't know, as I read it, the villain is Vandal Savage from Legends of Tomorrow season 1. That's what he looks like.
There's probably a lot to that, for sure.
And I don't know, this guy, some guy wrote Legends of Tomorrow and kind of show around that. I don't know who that guy is.
You know what it is? One of my pet peeves is people who create IP really for the purposes of turning it into a TV show or a movie,
right.
Which I find to be, that's a very cynical approach to things. And I'm always on guard myself that I'm not doing that. If I write a novel, I want the novel to be good as a novel. If I do a comic book, I want it to be good as a comic book. At the same time, I have to recognize the fact that my 10,000 hours, my Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours of mastery, are really in film and television. And I would argue comic books now as well, but certainly not in prose. I don't have 10,000 hours in prose. So as a result, when I tell a story in prose, I'm still relying on my 10,000 hours of experience writing comics, TV shows, and movies, which are structured in a very particular way. That sort of episodic, issue by issue way of things unfolding is hard for me to shake. It's you can take the boy out of Hollywood, you can't take Hollywood out of the boy.
And don't feel bad about it. It's not a criticism. It's
no, and I don't take it as such. I actually It's funny. I don't look at it as something either good or bad. It just is.
Right. That's fine.
It just is. And it's funny. Like the story takes place in two different time periods. There's the present day story of Jonas, the protagonist, trying to find his wife in the multiverse, and then we're periodically flashing back and telling this other story about their courtship and their romance and their eventual marriage. And I broke out when I was breaking the story. I broke out both stories separately, and whether I'm writing a novel, a graphic novel, a movie, a TV show, I'm still always relying on that basic 3-act structure, that classic, dramatic, structure of, set up, build, emotional low point, resolution, climax, resolution. And I very intentionally, built in, those 3-act breaks in both storylines. And then when I was organizing the chapters, made sure that the end of the second act of the present day story was contemporaneously in the novel with the end of the second act in the flashback story. And my editor, Jason Kirk, asked if that was intentional. And I'm like, yes, actually, it was phenomenally intentional. I really appreciate you noticing it. Because I think that, no matter what medium you're writing in, those basic dramatic structures are always, present or should be always present. I'm not a huge structuralist as a writer, but I aspire to be one. I aspire to be the type of writer who really very neatly writes narratives that fit into the 3-act structure. And sometimes I'm successful and other times much less so.
I think we're just now seeing the first generation or two of writers who have not grown up with that television-based structure.
Yeah.
Even though like some of the streaming shows that I've watched are very clearly still involved in that. And I understand that, there's international sales and commercials and syndication. I get that. That's okay. But we do have that possibility of going towards where movies have been, which is sit down, tell your story. That's it.
Yeah. Well, and I think we've seen with the short order streaming series, we've seen this tendency to impose a 3-act structure on an 8-episode season. And in my opinion, when that's been done, I can usually feel it as an audience member. And there's usually like 1 or 2 episodes right in the middle that kind of feel like filler, kind of feel like they're just biding time to get to the second act break. And I think, there's a certain, I hate to put it this way, but like there's a certain art form to imposing a 3-act structure on a long form story. It's not that you can't do it, but I think you've got to be smart about how you go about doing it. Like when we were breaking out Arrow and Legends of Tomorrow, those seasons had a 3-act structure built into them. But I think you can run the risk of being dogmatic, as some shows do, and as a result end up with 6 episodes that are pushing story and then 2 episodes that are kind of filler.
One of the ways to see that is to go back and watch reruns of Manna from U.N.C.L.E., particularly the first season, which was very, very well written, in my opinion. Because they told you which act you're in. They called it Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, And if you're observant or you want to write television or just write, you understand that structure after a while.
Well,
however, all structures, by definition, are confining.
Sure. Yeah. I think, well, it's funny. I've been writing television long enough that I was around for the changeover from 4 acts in an average episode of television to 6 acts. Mm-hmm. And that fundamentally changed the way you, of course, broke your story. And it it changed the medium really, in a lot of ways, and it's something I think, hopefully the audience doesn't notice it in a bad way, but it definitely, when you have to like be building to an act break every 5 minutes or so, that's going to change the tempo of the storytelling. It's going to change the very nature of the way you lay out and break your story.
Yeah, at times it's going to be forced.
Yes.
And no, I did not say feel forced. It's going to be.
It all depends on as with most things, it's all dependent on the execution.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to ask, and it kind of follows on that, is, most of the TV writing that you've done has been in longer form, 20 so episode seasons, but you also have done shorter episode seasons. What do you think of that evolution in the way that TV is being packaged?
British.
I tell you, I miss it. I mean, look, I miss the long form as a viewer. I miss 22 episodes. At the same time, I don't think every show lends itself to a 22 episode season. Where I would love to see us get to, and I don't think we're going to get here. I think, certain economics are locked in, but what I would really like to see as a viewer is season lengths really determined by the nature of the story that's being told. There are shows that are great at 8 episodes. There are others that are great at 16, and there's others that really need 22 episodes to breathe. And it really depends on the nature of the show and the type of story being told. So I wish there was that flexibility built into the business side of things. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be that flexibility.
No, and it doesn't seem like it's likely to improve with everybody hemorrhaging money the way they are. You're looking to make cutbacks because Lord knows you don't want somebody else to come in and make cutbacks on your 7 or 8 figure salary. So you're going to start cutting, and it's not going to inure to the benefit of storytelling at all.
No, I mean, and we're definitely in a period where the cart of economics and the cart of business is dragging the horse of art and storytelling. It's particularly acute right now, and it's particularly bad right now. I've been doing this long enough that I do see that comes and goes in waves. There are cycles to everything a season. So I'm optimistic that it won't remain this way forever, but that's certainly the period that we're in right now, for sure.
It can't remain this way forever because the consumer doesn't have that kind of money. The money it takes for the consumer to spend to keep this nonsense going the way it is. Everybody jumped into streaming. It seems that nobody really thought it through. I'm sure everybody thought they thought it through, but today it's very, very different than it was when it started, and that was just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's not a sustainable business model, and it's certainly not
as a person who's written for a streaming show, right, and run that. What was your experience, for example, with Carnival Row versus some of the other things that you've done that were not built for streaming?
Well, I tell you, I mean, because you are fundamentally, as a result of the shorter order, production and writing are separated in the process. So, when I was doing Carnival Row, we were aiming to write the entire second season before filming it. And I got to say, as a showrunner, that makes your life a million times easier. Trying to build the plane while it's in the air is very, very, and when you're doing 22 episodes or 23 episodes a season, and you're in production and in the writer's room at the same time, you've got about 5 different episodes in different stages that all require your attention, and it's like going from being a cop in Manhattan to a cop in Kansas. It's a very different job when you're in production at the same time you're still trying to write. So I liked, the more civilized, way of that streaming works. There are problems, with unfortunately there are problems with the streaming model, not just from an economic standpoint, but from a creative standpoint. The more, the thing I describe is the more an 8-episode season becomes looked at as an 8-hour movie, the more the showrunner is going to get treated like a screenwriter. And ask any screenwriter, they don't want to be treated like screenwriters. They'd rather be treated like showrunners. You become very dispensable. You become, very subject to a lot of notes. One of the things that I think keeps the trains running in network television with the longer orders is the fact that, you got to go into production. It's, at some point, it's got to be pencils down on all the notes, guys. But because, like I said, in streaming, production and the writing process are separated from each other, well, theoretically, you can just, if you're an executive, you can just note those scripts till the cows come home.
Before they and then just hold off production until you're ready.
Until
you're satisfied.
Until you're satisfied, which, by the way, may never come.
Sure.
That's why, that's why, a lot of the shows I've worked on in the streaming space haven't, we wrote the entire season, like with Green Lantern, we wrote the entire season of Green Lantern, and then they pulled the plug on the show. And that's, I wish I could say that was a rare circumstance, but that's actually become the norm, unfortunately, these days.
Well, I mean, there was a I think I remember a really big delay in Carnival Row, because I remember when you were telling me about it the first time we met. This was like 2018 or 19, and it was a long time before it came out.
Well, what happened was I was brought in after season 1 to basically work with the show's creator, Travis Beacham, to fix season 1, which involved, like 90 pages worth of reshoots and opening up all the cuts and, sort of reordering some episodes in one particular case, and then sort of reforming the show. And then once we did that, we got the second season pick up, and we wrote 7 scripts and an outline for the 8th episode. And we were 5 days into production on season 2 when Travis, the creator, and I were fired. And the reason it took so long for season 2 to come out was, they kept doing reshoot after reshoot after reshoot after reshoot. They basically sort of noted that show into oblivion.
Sure.
Is fundamentally what happened.
Well, it's great. I mean, that's essentially what you're doing. I want to get to a question, and it kind of is an interesting thing. I kind of want to reframe it, but the question is, when crafting stories, do you start with concept? Do you fill in the gaps, or do you start with characters? So, like, how much of the, for example, in any lifetime, how much of that was the characters versus the story that started to generate it? And if you could say, "Hi, Matt," I would appreciate that.
Hi, Matt. Thank you for the question. I mean, honestly, it really does depend on the project. There are some projects that are very concept driven, and there are other projects that are very character driven. In Any Lifetime was definitely started out as a concept driven idea. I had this idea about, a husband looking for his wife in the multiverse. And to service that idea, I had to come up with, okay, who's the husband? Who's the wife? Who are these characters? And eventually the characters, become these fully fleshed out, figures in my imagination, and they start to drive the story. But different writers approach different things differently, and different concepts, different projects require their own, way of working. I've certainly worked on other things that were far more character oriented. But I will say, as a whole, I tend to be a very conceptual writer. I tend to start off with the concept first, and then look, to create characters to populate and dramatize that concept. I don't think there's, a good or bad way, there a right or wrong way of doing it. I'm a very big believer in not being dogmatic, in sort of almost being very mercenary, in the sense of, come up with the process that best serves the idea, or best serves the project that you're doing, and then be ruthless, in terms of achieving your end objective, which is to end up with at the very least, a good script or a good manuscript, at the end of the day. But in the case of Indian Lifetime, it was definitely, a concept forward type of project.
I'm a big believer in stories having a beginning, middle, and end. And if you don't have that end in mind, it can flounder. I'm also a big fan of Casablanca.
Sure.
And they filmed the whole movie. It's a really brilliant movie. Michael Uslan says it's as close to a perfect movie as you can get. And damn, I think I agree with that. But the ending didn't work. It tested horribly. And I mean, just really horribly. And they knew they had a great movie, so they reshot the ending. They rewrote the ending. They reshot it. And everything that was coming up to a certain point came up to a different point. And it worked. So pull the stick out of your ass and go back to storytelling. That's what works for the story.
I think I'm a big believer in that. I totally agree with you. I think you can always tell when something's not working. I don't think you need a test audience to tell you, hey, this ending doesn't work. I think it in your bones. Oftentimes, I think we tend to use the test audiences or the executives or any of the variety of different sources of notes as a way really of confirming what we do know truly in our gut, as writers. I don't think I've ever gotten a note worth anything that I didn't feel on some level already. I might not have been able to articulate it that way to myself, or I may not have seen it with such clarity, or I may have seen it and just was in total denial, which happens. But I think fundamentally, storytelling is, it's one of the most primal aspects of human existence. We've been telling stories, ever since, cavemen, gathered around a campfire. And I think we have our own sort of internal, whether you're a professional storyteller or not, professional writer or not, you have your own internal barometer of whether or not the story feels complete, whether it does have that beginning, middle, and end. And I think one of the challenges, one of the obligations of a writer is to listen to that voice that you have in the back of your head going, this doesn't work yet. This isn't quite right. And you don't listen to that voice at your peril, I think.
That's certainly true. Your reference to the campfire, that's a reference I've made a lot, particularly with respect to Mike Grell's work. I've had the privilege of working with Mike for decades. And I've always said, he tells the types of stories that you're going to tell sitting around a campfire.
Yeah.
And for my honeymoon, we actually went out to Mike's place. He was living up in Washington State at the time, out in the middle of the boondocks. And, some friends came over and they set up a little bonfire. And we spent the next 5-6 hours telling stories around the bonfire.
Yeah.
And I got a chance to see Mike's bonfire stories and how you emote them. And, because you have that 3-dimensional aspect that we have in comics, but we do it totally differently. We have in movies, and we do it totally differently. The campfire, it's all live.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful evening. It was just a wonderful evening. And I'm still, this is like 30 years ago, and I'm still waiting for Mike to draw that. But
I've got Mike Barr stories. So those, not Mike Grell Barr stories, which are not as good, I'm sure, but they're fun too. I want
Mike
to.
was so happy, by the way. I got to tell you this, Mark was so happy about how you guys got him involved in that first season.
Well, he was incredibly gracious. He was incredibly gracious, to be willing to be involved. And, his obviously Longbow Hunters was a huge influence on Arrow. And I would say that, the whole Arrow series, there are sort of two seminal texts were Longbow Hunters and Green Arrow Year One by Andy Diggle and Jock. And
I can see both of them. I see both of those.
That's like, to me, those two books are Arrow. And Mike was terrific. I was thrilled to work with him just as a fan, quite frankly, because I've always loved his stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I tell this Mike all the time. And I kind of want to geek out just with you a little bit, but like Longbow Hunters changed the game. Longbow Hunters changed comics in ways that I don't think either of the Mikes understand.
I think Longbow Hunters, it really, honestly, it came along at this magical moment in time, for DC. And I think it was as seminal and as impactful as, Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, George Perez's Wonder Woman run, and John Byrne's Man of Steel. And, to me, it fits right there, with those other three projects.
That was a magical time.
It really was. It really was. And it was, everyone says, Crisis on Infinite Earths rebooted the DC universe. And that's true from a story perspective. But I would argue that those four books that came after Crisis, in the wake of Crisis, they rebooted the creative juices of DC. Those four books.
That was the entirety of my objective with the Legends miniseries. And it's something that was not picked up, that I can recall, by too many other people afterward. Crisis pulled the DC universe apart and put it back together in a certain way, killing off characters and ending ideas and starting new ones. Great, you've started new ideas. What are you going to go do with that? And in Legends, we created Amanda Waller, we created Suicide Squad, we brought in New Flash, so on and so on and so on. And that rebuilding part only works if you're committed to using that rebuild.
Yes.
And
well, you have to commit to it too.
Every hour.
That's the other part. Like it worked for a long time. I don't think we should denigrate it to it changed, but the thing is, it when you now decide that you have to do Final Night and 0 Hour and Millennium every year, you don't give anything enough time to live in that creative juice.
We're doing it every week, not every year. And these event miniseries now directly lead into another event miniseries.
Sure.
Yeah.
And, my memory isn't as good as it used to be. So I don't want to have to schlep around all these encyclopedias, even if they're on my iPhone. I want to tell stories.
Heavier?
I'm sorry?
Make your iPhone heavier?
It feels that way, yeah. It feels pretty heavy, actually. It's my iPad that's heavy.
We kind of morphed into talking about Arrow, and so one of the things I wanted to talk about, like, how did you get involved with that project? Was it your relationship with Greg from Jack and Bobby?
Yeah, Greg, Greg and I first worked together on a show called Jack and Bobby, and
Dropping
we
knowledge.
really hit it off, and we kept in touch, and we did a show together called Eli Stone, and we, along with Michael Green, wrote the Green Lantern movie, the critically acclaimed Academy Award winning uh, Ryan Reynolds starring Green Lantern movie, and sort of contemporaneous with Green Lantern being in post, Greg had come to me and said he had an idea for how to do Green Arrow as a TV show, and we just we started talking about it. We sort of started building out from Greg's initial ideas, but then the reality of the Green Lantern experience kind of hit us, and we were like, do we really want to do this again? Because at the end of the day, Green Lantern, it got away from us. Greg was originally supposed to direct it. They brought in another writer to rewrite us. The movie kind of stopped being ours, and we lost creative control over it. And that's just not a great feeling. And we were like, this movie's not going to be very well received. Do we really want our names on another failed DC property, much less a failed DC property with green in the title?
So just drop the green, go for Arrow.
Yeah, so we were not, we kind of, like, I would say, lost interest in doing it. But then Peter Roth, who was the head of Warner Brothers Television at the time, he just loved Greg's vision for it and just wouldn't let it go, and kept calling and calling. He even ended up calling me. I'm like, Peter, I'm nobody. What are you calling me for? And eventually Peter was so, insistent and persuasive that Greg and I had another conversation about, okay, if we were going to do this, what would it look like? What would it have to look like from a creative environment standpoint? It's sort of like, if we're going to do this, like, what do we ask for? And we sort of devised a set of circumstances that were really just designed to protect the creative vision. The lesson from Green Lantern is, look, anytime you do a TV show or a movie, you're not guaranteed success. You're not guaranteed that it's going to turn out well. But if you're going to go down on your vision. Go down on your ideas and your execution and your own work. Don't, like, get it taken away from you and turned into something that you never intended and don't want to have your name on. So we, sort of, created a list of, what we called our unreasonable demands, and Warner Brothers and the CW said yes to all of them, and that's how we ended up, pushing forward on the project.
I mean, it was really important. I was a huge fan of Smallville, and you basically followed that. Was there like, hey, we're Smallville's ending, we want something to take its place? Was that part of any discussion that you guys were involved in?
No, in fact, there wasn't even, like, I think, a desire on anyone's part, Warner Brothers or DC's part, to replace Smallville.
I'm not saying it replaced, but like it
or
followed after.
Follow after. No, there really wasn't. Honestly, it really was the strength of Greg's initial ideas and his vision for the show that's what got people excited. As it turns out, we ended up using a lot of the infrastructure that was left behind by Smallville. A lot of our crew
set
worked on Smallville. A lot of the stage space was used on Smallville. Obviously David Nutter, who directed the Arrow pilot, also directed the Smallville pilot. So there was a bit of a sort of a corporate handoff, but no one ever said to us, "Oh, great, this would be a good follow-up to Smallville."
Right. I'm that's fine. If we can go nerdy for another second,
Sure.
so nobody can look at your body of work and not be convinced that you grew up a nerd loving comics and sci-fi, right? I mean, you've taken on projects that are property that are, work for hire stuff that's the gamut from beginning to end, Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, all DC, Marvel, everywhere, right? You've done a lot of X-Men work. Was X-Men a thing for you growing up? Was that one of your books?
Yeah, I mean,
So what is your favorite X-Men story?
My favorite X-Men story. Ooh, that's tough.
And does it relate to this person?
It's funny. I was, a huge X-Men fan long before Rachel came into the picture.
Sure.
It's funny. I'll be honest. I don't have a single favorite X-Men story.
That's fine.
I have runs.
Okay, yeah, that's what I meant. Like, it doesn't have to be a single story. Like, is there? What's your X-Men era? If we can tell.
Well, I came in the first issue of X-Men that I ever read was X-Men 139, and that was with the cover "Welcome to the X-Men, Kitty Pryde. Hope you survive the experience."
Right.
And that led straight into Days of Future Past, which led straight into Dave Cockrum returning to the book and the trilogy where Doctor Doom and Arcade kidnap the X-Men's loved ones. I
was just looking into that trilogy recently, yesterday.
It was so great, just blew my mind. Literally like every month it was some new book. And bear in mind, I hadn't even read at that point the Dark Phoenix saga.
Right.
It wasn't.
It took a while because you couldn't just pick up your iPad.
You couldn't. And there wasn't really trade paperbacks back then. I mean, my recollection is that it took like a year or two after I discovered the X-Men for the Dark Phoenix saga to be collected in trade. So I was just blown away by the stuff that was being published when I was reading without a knowledge that actually their masterpiece, I missed their masterpiece by a couple of months.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's kind of funny. But it's like coming into Star Wars with Return of the Jedi and not Empire Strikes Back or the original Star Wars. But Return of the Jedi is still pretty great. And I just absolutely, I just devoured, X-Men. I think, I was saying to someone the other day that I obviously have been reading comic books for much longer, before discovering X-Men, but reading that first X-Men issue for me, 139, was like rediscovering comics. It was a profound sea change. I didn't know comic books could be like that. It forever altered my my readership.
You just said a phrase that I've been trying to evoke from our readers forever, which is, I didn't know you could do comics like this.
Yeah.
That's what I got into this business for. We've talked about that on this show. I wanted to see us do comic books that people will think you couldn't do. And that doesn't.
Did that.
I'm sorry?
You did it. You accomplished that goal.
So did Robert Crumb, but he did it in a different way. And by the way, I'm a fan of Robert's, but that was easy. Of course you couldn't do it. All that tits and ass. Of course not. A little different when you do the question.
Or Flag, or Grimjack, or John Sable. Those were comics that I didn't know you could do that there, right?
I am contractually prohibited from discussing the details of the 6 or 8 Grimjack TV scripts I have given notes on. Because that project ultimately didn't go anywhere. It was too expensive, and then COVID. Um,
COVID ruined a
but
lot of
it's I can only imagine. I mean, I've gone through this with some other projects, but never to all of these scripts. Mark, I can only sympathize with your situations. It's mind numbing.
You can my friend Michael Green likes to say this is a hard business for people who care.
Yeah, there you go.
And,
There you go.
it's very true. It's very, very true. And especially these days. I think these days when, like I said, entire seasons of television can be commissioned and then thrown out, entire movies can be shot and filmed and then thrown out. It's hard to, it's hard to care. Your better angels are trying to protect you constantly and saying, don't get too invested in this because it may never see the light of day. And I think what that does is it really requires writers to figure out a different reason to be invested. You've got to be invested without the knowledge that something's actually ever going to see an audience. You've got to figure out a way to be passionate without making that contingent upon whatever you're working on actually getting published or released.
Yeah, it's a mind-numbing business. I have been involved in a number of projects, movies and television. My career in broadcasting is mostly in radio. At a time when you could only own 7 different stations, AM stations and FM stations, 7 different TV stations. So there was this thing called competition. And as that competition evaporated under the Reagan administration, so did our opportunities to tell great stories.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. We think that, or we're told that deregulation and lack of enforcement of antitrust laws are designed to benefit capitalism. But the truth of the matter is that it does. They do just the opposite.
Sure.
Capitalism it thrives and is fueled by competition. But like you said, it started with Reagan and it continued under Clinton, and I would argue under Obama that
yes,
we just we've eliminated all of these all of these horrible. We eliminated all of these laws that were designed to foster competition and really have capitalism work the way capitalism is supposed to work. I think the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was figuring out how, Wall Street figuring out a way to make even more money with less competition. Seems crazy to me, but they figured it out.
It took me a long time to understand, and I mean decades to understand, that what I was voicing as an antipathy towards capitalism was really meant to be hostility towards capitalists. There's a difference between capitalists and capitalism. And it was quite a revelation when that popped out of my brain. Wait a moment. No, these guys are assholes. The system is different.
Yeah, I mean, it's very true. And it's funny, if you go on the internet and you talk to people, like they'll say that, it's late stage capitalism. We're in late stage capitalism. And I'm like, I don't know if that's true. That sounds more like wishful thinking to me than anything else. I think capitalism seems to be doing pretty damn well. And it does not seem to be in its late stages at all. For better or for worse. But I agree with you that the problem is not capitalism. The problem is the capitalists who are in charge.
Right.
We have a couple
of that, Bob.
Well, we have a couple questions. We're going to get to them in a second. Speaking of the ultimate capitalist, what can you tell us about what you're doing with Star Wars, and will it be announced at D23?
Oh, good question. I don't think it's going to be announced at D23 because I think.
Well, the reason I ask is because there's a lot of like Marvel didn't really talk about Star Wars at San Diego, and I know there's a lot of stuff coming. So some of the people are suggesting that D23 might be the place where they might talk about it.
I would certainly never say it was impossible. Normally I know when Marvel's going to make an announcement because they've at least gotten a quote from me. So I'd be surprised if my Star Wars thing was announced at D23. I actually don't know what the plan is in terms of when to announce it and how to announce it. I can tell you that we're already going great guns. I've already turned in the first 2 scripts. I'm at work on the 3rd script. The artist whose name I can't mention yet because not officially yet, is already working on character designs. I'm really excited.
Character designs. I like that.
Design. Yeah. Well, my whole thing is, this is true anytime I do any kind of work for hire, but I think it's particularly true when I work with Star Wars is I want to play with all the toys, but I also want to create some new toys as well.
Is it different with Star Wars versus other other licensed properties or work for hire stuff? Do you find it yourself more willing to create stuff with Star Wars than say DC or Marvel proper?
No. I think I feel like with Star Wars, there's just more opportunities to create stuff than for DC or Marvel. But I think if you look at a lot of my work, for DC and Marvel, I introduced quite a few new characters to the tapestry.
There are creators who are reluctant to do that.
Yeah, I get that. I understand it. I think where that comes from is I don't want to give away a good idea,
right,
to these corporations. I totally get that. The way I approach things is when I create a new character for Star Wars or for Marvel or for DC, I'm creating that character out. That character is growing out of the franchise that I'm working in. It's not like I'm taking an idea from my notebook and supplanting that idea into what I'm working in. The new toy grows organically out of the field that I'm toiling in. So I don't feel like I'm trading away an otherwise great character I could sort of do independently somewhere else. The character is born out of whatever the franchise that I'm working in is. So, and I also
we belong there is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, like it would feel weird to pluck them out, or it would feel weird to insert someone. It wouldn't be organic, for me, at least in the way I work in my process. So, and I kind of, I always say I work for 10-year-old me. I do the stuff that 10-year-old me thinks is cool. And 10-year-old me really likes the idea of adding some new, Star Wars characters. I'm as excited to invent some new Star Wars characters as I am to use the ones that I grew up with. And the great thing about my job is I get to do both. So that's, to me, it's just, privilege on top of a privilege.
I have enormous respect for the 10-year-old inside me because he's been paying the rent most of my life.
Yeah.
You got to understand that. You got to be an adult about certain things.
Yeah.
But there are times when you don't.
Yeah. It's very, I feel very, very blessed.
This has been wonderful. Time is getting ahead of us, and we have a little bit of time left. But there's a couple of questions I wanted to kind of get at. And if we can,
society question, come on.
Well, so here's the concept. So when you're writing novel versus TV show versus film, do you turn something in your mind and say, okay, I am now focusing on writing this in a certain way versus a different way versus a different way?
Eventually, there I always get to that point in the writing process. Initially, the answer is no. Initially, the answer is I have to figure out what the story is first, and then which medium I'm working in does dictate how I tell the story because each medium has its own set of tools for how the story unfolds. For example, a prose novel is a very internal instrument.
Sure.
Through prose, you can really get inside the heads of the various characters. It's very hard to do that in live action, unless you want it to be wall to wall voiceover. So there are different tools, or I like to express it as different colors in my palette, depending upon which medium I'm working in. 9.9 times out of 10, the story is the story. And I don't develop a story, I think, differently for a different medium, but how I tell the story, and how I work out the specifics of how that story is going to get told, that obviously does change very much from medium to medium.
So I appreciate that. And there's a lot that goes into, what the genre is, or I'm sorry, what the medium is that you're using. And, voiceover versus, even thought balloons, or how are you going to do that? That's a great thing. I want to say that, in any lifetime, it is the way that you do internal monologue. It's not really an internal monologue. It is very much, very, to the point, but you're getting it. You're getting the depth of what's going on in someone's head without being told this is what's going on in their head. It's really natural and organic, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I really, thanks for saying that because, among my many criticisms of my first novel was the fact that I was so thrilled after all these years of working in live action to have access to that internal monologue, that I feel like the internal monologues or the internality of the characters, I overdid it, and it overtakes the execution of the whole overall story. So a lot of times, I'm wrestling with, okay, I've got access to these cool new tools in this other medium, but I don't want to overuse them. I don't want to, I don't want to, use them just for the sake of using them. I want to make sure that I'm using those tools responsibly and in service of the story, and in service of the medium that I'm working in, but not in a overly, self, self-serving way.
In the service of the story is the writer's e pluribus unum.
I agree.
That
I
is-
agree.
that is stamped invisibly on every story.
I think so too, or it should be at least.
That's right. That's right.
We have one more question I kind of want to get to, and I want to address this to both of you. And this question is, speaking of audience expectations for stories, we see movie, TV, and any other thing, where the audience may roll their eyes at the subversion that's intended from the writer. What does it take to do subversion well, and why is it so hard to buy in these days? Do you think that it's hard for audiences to buy in these days? And where do you, subvert the story, and what does that mean for you? Is it something you're conscious about? How do you consciously do that, where you want to flip the script and surprise the story, the viewer, reader?
Oh, you mean? Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, like, subvert in
So the
what way?
context is thinking about the context was thinking about Last Jedi, and Star Wars audience was especially sensitive to the way Last Jedi changed the expectations versus what people were expecting when they went in there. And they felt the question person thinks that was, poorly done. But I think the question works in that if you're all of a sudden leading your audience down one particular path, and then you throw a wrench in it and turn it another way, sometimes you can get the audience to be like, oh, they're just doing that to surprise me. Whereas where do you do that where it becomes more organic?
Yeah, I think I get that. I think it first and foremost has to the answer to that question has to start with the character.
Okay.
It's I think it's fine to have a plot reversal. I think it's fine to subvert expectations. I like subverting expectations, and I like when it's done to me as a viewer or a reader. Where I think it becomes problematic is if, in order to pull off that plot twist, you have to have the character act in a way that's inconsistent with how the character has always been conceived of. It's interesting you mentioned Last Jedi. I happen to love Last Jedi, and
I like it too.
I like it in large part because I appreciated the way that Ryan Johnson subverted expectations. Where I find disagreement with other Star Wars fans is there are some fans who feel, and I understand this point of view, that Ryan subverted expectations by having characters like Luke Skywalker act in a way that was inconsistent with the way Luke would normally act. I didn't find that to be the case when I was watching the movie. I didn't feel as though Luke was acting any differently than he should, as opposed to any differently than the way I would like to see him act. I get that Luke's whole arc in The Last Jedi is rediscovering what it means to be a hero, rediscovering what he has to do to be a hero.
I agree with that.
This very sort of cynical place. But I don't feel like that was inconsistent with his character. I actually think if you go back and you look at Luke in The Empire Strikes Back, he is not he's never been the type of character who goes, give me the laser sword and I'm going to go fight the Empire. He gets down on himself. He thinks things are impossible. He thinks he's out.
Never going to be able to do it.
Yeah, he thinks he's never going to, always with you, it cannot be done. So I didn't feel like Ryan's interpretation of Luke was inconsistent with his character, though I do respect the point of view of people who feel otherwise. I will say, not to get too deep into the weeds on Last Jedi, though I really could talk about that.
Sure, we can do this another time.
But, Ryan was playing the hand that J.J. Abrams dealt him. Ryan is basically presented with a Luke Skywalker who has become a hermit, who has removed himself from the galaxy, who has removed himself from the conflict that's embroiling the galaxy. And he did that for a reason. And I think Ryan chose the most realistic reason, or the most, or the reason that was most consistent with Luke's character. The only other alternative, quite frankly, would have been to reveal that Luke has this contagious disease that will kill anyone he's in contact with. So he had to remove himself from the rest of the galaxy.
Sure.
That's the only other, alternative to explain what he's doing on Ahch-To by himself at the end of Force Awakens. So, we've got to, I think you can't, I don't think you can evaluate Last Jedi without an understanding of how Luke is reintroduced to the mythos at the end of Force Awakens.
Sure. I think that's fair. I think it's absolutely fair. Yep.
But to get back to the original question, I think it all does come down to subverting expectations is great. I would argue it's always desirable whenever you can. That's the whole point of storytelling, is to always surprise the audience. But you have to play fair, and you have to play fair with the audience. So you also have to play fair with the characters, and the characters can't or shouldn't do something that is completely out of character for them. And I think it's an interesting question. Does Luke do that in Last Jedi or not?
Speaking as an editor, because I think everybody already knows that I'm pro subversion.
We know that.
Yeah. There's two types of ways to tell that story. The first is the flasher mode, where this creepy guy just jumps out of nowhere. You've never seen him before, and he exposes himself. Okay, that's nice. The second is requires a little bit more subtlety. It requires more finesse. It requires a lot of thought and setup. You have to go back and make sure that all the little elements in the background have been established the way you want it to be, the way you need it to be. And that means you've already brought the reader or the viewer along with you. They're ready for it because you've set them up for it. Is that subversion? Yeah, hell yeah. And I think it's the best part of the medium.
But it's a method of it's a tool in the storyteller's arsenal. Sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to come back. We're like out of time, but I want to come back to In Any Lifetime. The link to this book is in the chat wherever you're watching this. So please check it out. What do you want people to take from this novel? If you said, please read this novel because you're going to get,
I'll tell you, at the end of the day, no matter what I work on, I'm really just trying to entertain the audience. Like,
so you're going to be entertained. I agree with you. I'm loving it.
Every now and again, I'll do something that is a little more high-minded. That's a little more like, I want people to debate something, or I want people to look at something in a way they've never looked at it before. But in the case of In Any Lifetime, I really was just trying to tell an entertaining story. A good story, well told, was really my bar. That was the bullseye I was shooting at. I hope I hit the target. The response to the book has been really, really positive. Probably among the most positive responses I've ever gotten to anything I've worked on. So that's very satisfying. I think, the book, from the feedback I've been getting, appeals to people who don't ordinarily like science fiction or don't ordinarily like romance. It's, if you're not a science fiction person, the sci-fi elements are presented in a way that I think are easily digestible to people.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the best things about it. Absolutely. It's accessible, even though you're talking about, kind of complex esoteric things, flipping a coin. The way that you do that is the way that you, and I'm just going to, there's a method that the main character explains this very complex cosmic theory to the other characters in the novel that is essentially telling the reader how to form their mind around it. And it's just an excellent way you did that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm, a big believer that when you tell a story in any medium, it's like throwing a party at your house. You have to be a good host first. You don't want to make it difficult for people to find your house. You don't want to make it difficult for them to find parking. You want to be polite. You want to be a good host. And, I feel like a big part of my job as a writer, and especially in prose, is to tell the story in a way that doesn't put up these barriers to entry. to people. When I was growing up as a reader, I would read these like esoteric pieces of like Russian literature and stuff. I was an English major in college, and I would actually get annoyed at the author. I'm like, this is just you're just being rude. You're not being clever. You're just being rude. You're not,
I
you're
agree.
not thinking of your reader, and you're not thinking of why they're reading your book. They're fundamentally reading to be entertained first and foremost.
People do that in comics too.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. And I one of my pet peeves are writers in any medium who don't think about their audience, and don't think about the people who are consuming the story, because otherwise it's just very, like I said, it's rude, it's impolite, and I'm a big opponent of that.
Well, again, thank you for being here. Again, anybody who's watching, in the Substack, in the chat, in the comments, you'll find a link to Mark's Substack, and in there you'll find out where he's going to be over the next. You're doing a bunch of shows for the rest of the year. They're in there, so go there and find that and subscribe so you can see what's going on. You'll be able to hear whatever the Star Wars announcement is when we can hear it. And you have next week. I think it's next week. Your last Green Lantern story comes out, and then next month there's the Deadshot story is going to come out right now.
Bloodshot.
I'm sorry, Bloodshot.
Yeah,
I make that mistake all the time too.
Did I say Deadshot?
They got some good stuff coming down the pike for sure.
Good. Well, thanks again for being here. I really appreciate it.
Wonderful talking with you. I really enjoyed the conversation.
I really appreciate it.
I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you over some food at some point in time.
That sounds really nice. I like that. Food and wine.
Sounds good to me.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
What's Tuesday?
We have Greg Lockhart on the show on Tuesday. You stay tuned and make sure you subscribe. You'll find out when we go live. It'll be Tuesday night at 8:00. Greg Lockhart, who is the writer of Trick Pony. He's also an editor for comics. We're going to talk to him about what's going on with him, Trick Pony, as well as some of the other things he's written. He also wrote I'm going to say it wrong, but there was a book, Lieberstrauss. Do you remember that? It came out a couple of years ago. It was a comicsology only thing. Very good.
I didn't see that.
Anyway, we're excited for that. We already have a guest scheduled for the following week. We will have at least Ed Cato that week, and there's some more going on beyond that. We will see you guys Tuesday. We'll be here. Make sure you subscribe, and
thank you all for being here. As always, we truly appreciate it. Otherwise, Bob and I could just have a phone call. So
yeah, but it's more fun when people like to talk to us.
That's right. That's true. Very true.
Thanks, all right, everybody. We'll see you later.
This has been a production of the Pop Culture Squad Network. PopCultureSquad.com. How do you nerd?